Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our second session of the day. My name is Michael Heidrich-Brown. I'm your session facilitator. I've got the housekeeping items, and then I'm going to hand it off to Taylor here for your panel discussion. Couple things. We have a Night at the Museum party going on tonight, and I really encourage everyone to go. I'm personally super excited about this. There's a shuttle that's leaving from the front of the Marriott Marquis that will take you there. I think they say it's on L Street. The expo hall opens up after this, and there's a bunch of neat things that are happening. Jane McGonigal is signing books down there, so if you like Harry Potter, you should get down there. Professor McGonagall. No. It flopped last time too. Don't worry about it. Lastly, there is a short break after this session. Lunch is at 12:15 down in the expo hall, and with that, I will hand it off to Taylor.
Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for joining us today. We've got a pretty fun panel discussion planned, creatively yet poorly named Deep Blue End. We're going to get into sort of what our teams on stage here have accomplished in the last few years and innovating in stressful times caused by the pandemic and the increasing cyber threat that each of these orgs face. I'm Taylor Lehmann. I'm a director in the Office of the CISO at Google. I'm also Alphabet's Health Security Officer and oversee sort of all of health security programs at Google. I'm joined by Mike Levin. Mike is the Deputy CISO at 3M, formerly of UnitedHealth Group. I will explain why these three are up here in a moment, but without making you wait too long, because I've got a great dad joke I want to get to, and I'm going to ask you, TJ. 3M is a international company many of you have heard of, has an $8 billion healthcare business, which most people haven't heard of. So Mike and his team protect quite a bit of very important health infrastructure. TJ, next to him, TJ is the AVP of cyber at HCA Healthcare, which is the largest for-profit health system, I want to say, on the planet. HCA treated more COVID patients than any single health facility in the world during the height of the pandemic. TJ's team runs basically all of cyber defense for HCA. I haven't yet found something that TJ's team doesn't or isn't responsible for doing at HCA, who I've worked personally very close with. And then, of course, on the end is Lisa. Lisa Ackerman is also Deputy CISO at GlaxoSmithKline. Lisa's a really impressive background. Came to GSK after being the global head of threat intelligence at State Street. Long career in the U.S. government as well. And Lisa's focused on bringing threat intelligence to the boardroom and really helping influence and drive GSK to the next level. So it's really exciting. The reason why these three are here, we have the entire supply chain for healthcare on stage right now, more or less, from those who create the medicines, who distribute, manufacture, in some cases implant the devices, and then the physicians who do it. So we're all three up here now. Dad joke. There's two people in this room who've heard this joke, so if you don't laugh, well, I don't know. I can't jump off stage and smack you, but I would. TJ, why are Sundays a little bit better?
Oh man, and this is live action, so we have not prepared this.
Get this wrong.
I don't know what.
Because they come after Saturdays. I mean, it's a good dad joke if nobody laughs, and I'm the only one who thinks it's funny. So.
Come after Saturdays.
Yeah, they're after Saturdays. You get it? No?
Saturday.
Because it's a sad day. Whatever.
Oh,
If you have to explain it,
Saturdays.
nobody thinks it's funny.
Saturdays.
All right, so
I think you need to say it with a Boston accent, like the thick one.
I'm told the deadpan is something I'm good at. Whatever. All right. There has to be at least one fun thing that happens at this conference, right? I thought the dad joke on Harry Potter was like a bomb that I would definitely crush with mine, but it's fine. All right, so we have three different parts of the healthcare supply chain. Let's get into it. In a few words, could sort of maybe starting with Mike and going, like, what's unique about your subsector, and maybe put some perspective on threats that you sort of feel like you uniquely face within that context.
So I've been at 3M for about 100 days. Previous to that, I was at UnitedHealth Group for about 8 years and built out their cyber defense program. What I've noticed, particularly around healthcare and particularly cyber, is different threats based upon which industry. In manufacturing, particularly the interest is largely more focused upon IP. The 3M is a huge manufacturer. They make 55,000 products, and they make them everywhere, globally. So we operate internationally. China 2025 had an agenda for China to be the leader in artificial surfaces, which is a lot of the things that 3M makes is artificial surfaces. That's all they make, pretty much. Some of them adhesive, some of them not. So that's been very, very interesting there. Back at United Healthcare, the part that was interested is disruption of services. So that's been the biggest shift is in United Health Group, it was about availability because it was patient care, it was disruption. At 3M, it's a lot more about confidentiality. That's become the pinnacle. And the shifts over the time that over the 8 years at United Healthcare, there was a higher focus on confidentiality before 2016 when Hollywood Presbyterian happened. And that was the first healthcare provider to pay a major ransomware ransom, and basically got into the news. They paid about $20,000 in Bitcoin, and then basically caused billions of dollars of targets for since
put
then.
It on the map.
Yeah, that changed the ecosystem. That one hospital chain paying basically sent out a flag, basically saying target healthcare.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So.
No, love it, TJ.
So HCA, we're a provider, a large provider, a couple hundred hospitals, a couple thousand physician sites, but we also do M&A. So there's acquisitions where we're dealing with smaller hospitals as well. So the threats we see, of course, medical devices are out there and protecting those, as well as third-party supply chain. I mean, we're at kind of the end of the waterfall. It's kind of cool being here with this leadership in the full supply chain of healthcare, but all that kind of typically flows into the provider space. So we've got thousands of people that are connected to us and interlace. Unique to this timing, also during the pandemic, was the threat actors. We had intel that they would hold back, but they did not hold back. And so this was a moment we also realized they are very unethical, dirty, the idea of even attacking a hospital during this global crisis. Yeah. So that was a unique moment as well.
Cool. Lisa.
So for us, we're both life sciences and manufacturing. So we make the drug, and then we also package it and ship it. So we have both sides of it, not just IT operations, we have OT operations. So I think that is uniquely different for us. And a heart of what we do is R&D. So if you think about that from that perspective, everything left of patent is what somebody would want to take. And so trying to protect that information as we're developing those drugs or vaccines, making sure that we can protect those before it gets patented and gets released. And then even our manufacturing process, we don't want supply chain attacks or anything like that. So we're trying to protect those kinds of things as well. So I think that's what's uniquely different about us. And really our strategy is to protect 2.5 billion people around the world. And so it gives me a lot of reason to get up in the morning, right? And very passionate about what I do and making sure that we can protect and provide a secure platform for our employees to be able to do what they do to protect the people around the world.
Yeah, I think, so awesome. Confidentiality, availability, I think interesting things I think lots of folks get wrong about what's important in this industry is that trumps almost everything. Intellectual property theft is big. Yeah, I think it's interesting, we've fairly unique set of threat actors, but this industry has pretty much a full plate as far as threats and risks go to manage. But inevitably, it's ultimately about getting patients treatment, getting care delivered really uninterrupted from top to bottom. And that's the thing one other unique thing about all the folks on this page is that these are very mission-driven organizations and works together extremely well. And I think the ISAC and health is a particularly good example of really strong collaboration. So these groups also work together really well to defend each other. Now, thank you for set the stage. I'm going to spend a little minute on COVID-19 because each organization played a different role in the response to the pandemic. GSK had a couple of vaccine candidates that spent substantial amounts of money on testing and infrastructure to support delivery and shipment of the drug, and ultimately worked with organizations like HCA, who I mentioned, treated the most patients of any organization in the world, and then with 3M, taking the helm on producing tons and tons of PPE that were used through the global health system. So this group, let's just kind of all go back to March of 2020, now that we remember all of these things. TJ, what, for you in the defense space in a hospital, what were the initial priorities for your team?
Yeah, so I'll walk through a little bit of the timeline, just get a little immersive here with y'all, and then walk through some of the security components. So early in the pandemic, there was a need for the PPE masks, right? And so there was something of just getting, the nurses couldn't go home. So there was something to give direct care, and there was a need for masks in all the facilities. Later, it started to become getting ventilators into a lot of the hospitals, enough where we're even doing analytics to know where places, this thing was spreading, right? Y'all know this. And so when there was geographical places it was spreading, they were trying to even retune the hospitals to have more ventilator support, bed to ventilator. And then later there was the vaccine deployment, right? Where the vaccine was being made and had to get it out to the hospitals. So through that whole process, the security priorities and kind of what felt different. First, I just want to get this out there. And this was before March. It felt like, at least for me, the one thing was I wanted to make sure the team was safe. This was starting to even spread. We're based out of Nashville, but our hospitals are all over the United States and some in UK. But we have a really tight team in Nashville. We've got remote workers too. But I wanted to make sure that the team was safe. So we actually enacted a protocol early when we started seeing the spreading, and there'll be a theme and when I'm talking through this where our intelligence really beefed up, not just our intelligence and our team, but our partnership with the Health ISAC and others, because we were trying to trace where this thing was going, where it was moving. And so we made protocol on our security operations to start to go to remote when we started to see more spreading coming towards Nashville. And our intel team was even tracking the spread alongside with some CDC data and our own HCA data. So that part, when I think back, that was just key. Later, I don't know if, might talk to this later, but then it seemed to shift towards more mental, like just making sure our team was, still operating and everybody was isolated. But that was big, making sure the team was safe. We even had a new guy starting, and I remember he was just about to start moving, and we're like, no, go home, be with the family, stay remote, we'll figure this out. Making sure the team was safe. Then this PPE thing got super interesting because the mask ran out. And our intel team, I don't know if I've shared this with anybody, but our intel team actually was tracking these interesting business units that were starting to make masks that might have never been in manufacturing. And we needed millions of masks. And our intel team would actually track the business, do like background checks, figure out what they did. And this was we're in convergence, so our CSO has physical and cyber. So we would even have where our corporate jet was flying out to some place out in nowhere to meet this company that was starting to make masks and literally trading millions of dollars for millions of masks. So knowing it was N95 and clinical capable, knowing it was legit business, our intel team was tracking that with our top leadership as our physical security, and airplanes were flying in locations just to get masks because our nurses needed frontline care. IT was also doing a lot of supplying the remote capabilities. So there was also where we were trying to be dynamic. I'm sure all y'all felt that with being able to protect kind of the remote capabilities. But that was probably
that's an interesting take. Lisa, you were at State Street when this was all going down. How did your intel priorities change?
Quite a bit, and thanks for the shout out for intel. That's pretty good. So for the first thing really was it seemed like what shifted overnight to going from working at home to the global workforce, literally around the world, working from home. And so that was not a scenario that anybody had planned for. You plan for outages, you plan for different kinds of things, but you don't plan for your entire workforce to go home. Where we worked at, we had some people, because of the nature of the business that we didn't have computers at home, didn't have internet, had never even worked at home. So how do you solve those kind of problems overnight? And then you had to teach them about cybersecurity. You mean I can't let my maid use my computer? Or you can't let people, overlook, over my shoulder what I'm doing. So really trying to come up with ways to to teach them about cybersecurity at home. And we used intelligence to do that, real-time intelligence. So we were tracking all the different headlines the actors were changing to, because if you think about it, the actors have always been doing mischievous things, and all they did was change the headline. They took advantage of having a new big news item and changed their tactics to COVID-related. So we were tracking things like the actors talking about the virus is spreading here, or we have this vaccine there, or this is how it's going to impact you. And there was all kinds of mis and disinformation that we had to deal with. So that was really hard. And then we had third-party incidents that just skyrocketed because they were also working from home. So your third, fourth, and fifth parties didn't have the security at home that they did at work. And so actors knew this and took advantage of that as well. So dealing with not just the employees not knowing, but then the vendors not knowing. Our CISO and I actually called every single critical vendor that we have and talked to them about this threat and make sure that they understand what they need to do to respond to it, because it was really important. And then we also created some metrics to start tracking exactly what is it that we were seeing and how bad it was becoming. And so intelligence really was at the spotlight of all of this, just like my buddy here says. We really were working overtime. My joke is I really never thought I would be working that hard for a virus that was not on a computer. There's my tagline.
Yeah, I like it. That's way better than mine. Mike?
Yeah, so I can answer this question in two ways. I was not at 3M, so I can't really answer what they were doing there related to PPE, all the focus around that as well. But I remember January is actually when news first hit around COVID, and basically it got into like Reddit threads, and people were like obsessing about this. And my birthday is in January, and I remember wishing that I could spend more time with my kids, and boy, did that backfire.
Yeah.
Like a monkey's paw.
There can't be too much.
Yeah,
Yes.
there absolutely, I appreciate teachers more than ever. So we had, I was at UHG. At that time, about 50% of the cyber defense program was actually based in the Twin Cities. The Twin Cities have storms, snowstorms. So basically we have to plan for remote work. So we were ready for this. We had enabled things like always on VPN. We looked at SASEs and things like that. But back in 2019, none of the SASEs were really that powerful. When COVID actually started spinning up and the CARES Act happened and all that happened, UHG, it was amazing. The organization, everybody leaned in. And you got to remember how things were back then. Gal Gadot and a bunch of celebrities were singing on Twitter, Imagine, and it was this weird kumbaya moment where society in America was all focused. And UHG really leaned into this as well. We set up a portal to distribute funding to medical practitioners, and something like $140 billion of funding from the government was distributed out through UHG. And all these security capabilities that we had distributed throughout the organization all came to alignment, all these various elements. Yesterday you spoke with, I think it was Rich from Pfizer.
Right.
Right, yeah. And he talked about security poverty line. UHG doesn't have a security poverty line, but it definitely has haves and have-nots. There's not equal distribution of capability. Some things are more advanced, some things are just, where they are. This was an effort where everybody lined up, from a monitoring, defense, like bot protection up to Levin, advanced analytics. We'd had a data lake, and this was its moment to actually shine around analytics. It was quite amazing how all the pieces lined up. It was like a final boss. So
Interesting. Did any of you believe that, I think it was in the April-May time frame, when I think it was Lockbit, some other sort of platform operators made promises to not attack healthcare. How did you receive that? And did that, again, just talking about Intel priorities, in driving actions you took?
Well, they're threat actors. They're not going to tell the truth,
Criminals
right?
speak criminally.
Yeah, but the hackers are the good guys, right? And they rallied together to try to defend against them. We saw a lot of that, so that was really cool to see that perspective where you had big time names in the hacker community that were defending against these threat actors. I think that was really important, because it really showed how we were banding together, because it really takes all of us to defend against the threat actors. It's not one company, it's not one vendor, it's not one person, it's everybody that has to work together, and you really saw that. I think that's really what impressed me the most about that was the hackers defending against the threat actors. I'm differentiating there so that you can see like the good guys are really trying to protect the healthcare sector.
And I remember that moment, and I remember a discussion we had, because there's also a case with threat actors. It's not like you loosen up or sort of let go of the defenses. So we kind of had this moment.
Organizations that believed that.
Yeah, and that was the part we had. Knowing there's patients and hospital availability, we heard that call out, but even believing it would be trusting their call out. So it didn't have us hold back, but then it surely showed its face shortly after, because there was plenty of other actors that made attempts. So
it's opportunistic. To echo what TJ said, it really didn't change operations.
Yes.
Can't believe them when they say they're not going to do it.
Yeah.
What it did change is all the security researchers went home that summer and found so many vulns and bugs. That was like a highlight of ASM bug, basically followed by another one in Exchange, like every single week. And that was amazingly exhausting. So yes, your efforts were focused less on the adversary, but now you were focused completely around like attack surface management.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, that was the year of the load balancer, or a couple of big.
NetScaler.
Yeah, NetScaler.
It was
the
on
remote.
Kevin Mannion slide. Like that was the peak
remember
year.
those.
That was nuts. It was crazy.
We had,
I wish I could tell some of my athenahealth stories about those particular vulnerabilities. Those were fun. Mike, so let's shift to sort of the innovation piece and really get to like how the teams operated using what they had to sort of build capability that might not have existed before, but basically done so in response to sort of the new priorities. So, sort of building on what you were talking about, like what were the new priorities? Like, tell me about some work you guys did to take sort of threats head on, and how ready were you? What went well? What didn't?
Like we had all the parts, like I said, but they were all distributed separately. What allowed us to actually work during that, and is that whole year of 2020. It wasn't just like immediately, early on in the year. We were able to actually align strategy. Shortly after that, we embraced Mandiant's Defender's Advantage operational model. We shifted the organization around. That was a byproduct of the work during COVID. Having a dedicated validation function was amazingly effective to actually help identify basically where gaps were. Our intelligence program matured significantly. We had, at the time, a large data lake for security. Back then, Chronicle was still growing, these other platforms were still growing, we still had a homegrown data lake at the time. That really provided a bunch of unique insights. We're able to, we don't really talk about this, but deception tech started becoming more adopted at that time as well. And it was really great to see a lot of the barriers that traditionally got in the way of implementations of technologies because of unknown risks or whatever elements in an organization, all that went away. Like all of that faded away. It was all like everybody was aligned together. It was beautiful.
Yeah.
So this was the questions on innovation. Just to phase through a people one, quick tidbit. I'm a gamer. I grew up a gamer. It's what got me into computers, playing games in the 80s to get a computer working to play a game. And then later it's what got me into security, because I grew up in Japan and getting games from South Korea. When we would travel over there, or BBSs, I'd get malware, and it's what I studied and play with. But when we first built our cyber defense center, it's probably a room the size of this with monitors all over. The first thing I was saying was like, this is a cool LAN party room. and before the pandemic, we brought consoles, like monthly, we would do team night and bring everybody in and hook the consoles up and hang out and play games. So we had like a tight kind of hangout team. And so when the pandemic came, it was tough. So on the people side, we got a bit creative. We did have good remote tools. But we started having like Wednesday happy hour nights, and we would even hosted a comedian to kind of talk with the team and hang out. So that was really cool, and that's even carried on. We still do hybrid game night. Jackbox is a really good one, and you can play remote. We even had during hybrid moments, we'd have some on site, but our people that were remote, we did an audio video where it was like they were there in the board game. So just the people side, that was something we did. The big strategy, it felt like, was around priority and sort of risk focus. There was so many things going on, and we had to like line in with the business, and it felt like it just came in and out. as well as work-life balance and quality of life of the operations. So between those two, some of the other things that we came out during that moment that carried on, one's called RBA, or risk-based analytics. It's where we grab our alerts and we aggregate them together. And during COVID, we actually finished that effort. And so what it allows us to do is, you might have lower fidelity events, but you can bring them together across kill chain and aggregate, and then it does the scoring. That greatly optimized some of our defense center because they could get to the right alerts. Something else we did, and it's kind of carried in around the work life, is we started, and this kind of tailed out even now, we've called it harmonize, but it's where we've tried to allocate about 13% of everyone's time, which is about 4 hours, towards doing automation. And even now they've got the queue that feeds in like security AI tools, but both training yourself and optimizing the team and working together with the team, you can put your hours into it, and that's something we're working on as well that carried out of the pandemic. What didn't go well that we learned from, again, I talked about acquisitions. We'll have smaller hospitals, so we'll work in some environments that don't have all the controls in place, and we'll try to beef in those. And one scenario I remember was during the NetScaler, and we had this was a distributed environment, large physician offices, so that it wasn't like acute or direct care, but they got some of our IR that we responded to that environment. The trick was we couldn't get people in there to actually do forensics and investigation. You couldn't put
shelter in place.
Yes, you couldn't get consultants or on-site engagement of responders to clean up the environment. So something creative we did was create a jump box system, and we could deploy it and put it in that environment, and then do like remote forensics, and that's carried out on today. As well as we've beefed up some of the acquisition controls with some Health ISAC has around perch. It's like an egress sensor. So it's your last line of defense, and then we started a full endpoint deployment thing with acquisitions when they come on, as well as a managed system.
Yeah, no, it sounds like a lot. Lisa.
Yep. Good to hear about the way that you took care of your team. I think that was probably one of the most important things that we all learned. I mean, I worked from home prior to the pandemic, so I've been working home for years, so nothing really changed for me except I doubled the hours that I worked. It seemed like there were no boundaries, right? Everybody was working around the clock, and I didn't have another me, so I had to just keep working. I went from working 10 to 12 hours a day to 16, 18 hours a day, and it was crazy for like the first 30 days. I'm like, what am I doing? I'm killing myself. But if I'm doing that, that means my team's doing that too, right? So how do you find different ways to boost and keep the morale of your team? They're worried about their family members. They're worried about the virus just as much as we were, right? So coming up with those ways to take care of people, and that we still do today, like having happy hour. I had happy hour with my team. I'm not ashamed to admit that. We would bring in, we would do games. We would have a challenge, different topics every month. Sometimes when I felt like we needed more happy hours, I'll call them, we would have more meetings, right? And it was just to get the team together to make sure they were okay. Because I actually ran SecOps at that time too. So I had not just intel, but incident response and security operations. So there was a lot more to consider because of the different functions that we did. And then also working with our the third-party breaches. I mean, just how do you control that? And it was just really, we reevaluated the way that we asked questions of our vendors because there were some things we didn't think about. And when you saw all of these breaches that were happening, you're like, we should be asking different questions. So we changed the way that we did that from that perspective. And then the information sharing, it was just amazing, right? I've never seen people come together the way that we came together for COVID. Now I was in the SISAC at the time, and we had one particular gentleman who, him and his son, I don't know if you guys know Max Morris, but he was collecting data from around the world and publishing that to the FSISAC to help us in the intel side be able to prepare our companies. Just efforts beyond anything I could ever explain. But that sharing of information to me was so innovative. And today I think the FSISAC is actually in a better place than we were prior to the pandemic because we built more trust. We learned how we could really help each other other than just sharing IOCs and TTPs. And it was just a really good, innovative thing to me from my perspective.
Yeah, we had a mic Mike Slavek in Health ISAC do kind of the same
Yep.
thing.
Yes.
I actually just got to meet him in October. It's like, no way. I remember you. You're my hero. Same sort of thing, but cool. So shifting gears a bit, I think for me, some of the biggest surprises that I noticed, in addition to sort of the, criminals be criminaling, was the mis and disinformation. And you talked about it a little bit before. Brian talked about it a little bit yesterday, but this was hey, there's microchips in the vaccine, and wild animals like deer are getting COVID, and so watch out going outside, and sort of other crazy talks. And I know for me at Athena, this was a big deal. One of the first priorities for us was setting up a source of truth that we were always pointed at for all COVID-related information, but also sort of standing up clear points of contact for security issues, security events that maybe weren't as clear prior to there being 15,000 people working from home, right? Sort of different work landscape translated into different threats, translated into new controls. But the misinformation, disinformation stuff is wild. Just curious, give me an example of what you thought was, oh my God, and then any examples of how it was weaponized against your companies and what you did about it.
I think the chip rumor was the craziest thing. Don't get the
How would
vaccine.
that even work?
Don't get the vaccine because you're going to get a chip implanted in you. I mean, we barely had time to come up with a vaccine. How would we be able to be that creative? I think that the actors like to prey on the fears of humans and the emotions of humans. And when you get down to that and you think about, well, does that really even sound realistic? Most people don't think about that because they were in a mass panic, right? People were in a panic. And trying to use information that you had to be able to inform them to make sure that they didn't panic too much was pretty tough. And I wouldn't say that we were necessarily targeted with anything. I would say we were more responding to the global impact of all of this, right? And understanding what the actors were doing and how they changed their tactics and what they were doing with it, and then using that to help our vendors. I mean, we made Mandy a customer at the time, even helping our vendors be able to identify when something got through. Hey, this got through and it shouldn't have, and here's why. And then share that back to the vendors so they can block it from ever getting to us or others. And so doing things like that, I think, was really important, along with the information sharing thing, from my perspective.
And we had an interesting one, just on that theme of intelligence as well. There was a moment where people didn't think it was real. In that, I don't know if it was the first 6 months, and there was literally groups. So our intelligence supports our physical security as well. And there was literally groups of people that were just barraging into hospitals and trying to run around with cameras to go, this isn't really happening. Everything that they're saying, there's not people on ventilators. And so there was a moment where there was just misinformation, almost like social media or sort of a global incident that was causing people to visit into hospitals differently. And so we had to see where those were more localized with intelligence, and then support our physical security if there was cases to support that, which was interesting.
Conspiracy theorist.
Yeah, that whole side was like a whole.
Yeah.
It's hard enough to stand up an actual intelligence program in healthcare. So a counterintelligence program, good luck with that. How many corporations have a counterintelligence program to fight, misinformation? Where this actually impacted us, it wasn't actually so much the incidents with the misinformation during the actual era of the vaccine. It was later with the employees, because basically employees are people. They have different political views, and some folks just did not want to get vaccinated because of personal beliefs. And the way you had to manage that response, and I guess some employees are never coming back to the office, and that was actually the hardest part. It wasn't the external information on the company or from a cyber perspective. It was on the actual individual employees, and you can't educate them on that. If that's what they're going to believe, that's what they're going to believe. That's good luck with that.
Yeah, my parents stopped eating deer. That was one of the things I thought was odd. They're hunters their whole life. That stopped. I think just some of the increasing sort of cyber to physical, how that all connected to take information sharing online that actually created unsafe conditions for patients to be seen was interesting. We saw that in some of the hospitals in Boston, and certainly we were involved in a lot. Athena was at 40% of the U.S. health system effectively, and we caught a lot of stuff coming over, asks for help people looking for what's your source of information, just because we talked a little bit about the poverty line yesterday as well. Like, one of the unique conditions in health is not just that, yes, there's, these places where people aggregate to get care, but many of those, like hospitals in big cities, but many of the entities that make up the health industry are very small and don't have the same resources that, say, some of the large orgs like HCA has. And so we became an interesting potential threat in a sense, given we were so central to so much, and yet we had so much information and so many resources that we were sharing, and I was, always took that responsibility seriously. Okay, so just sort of looking back then, this is now we're into year 3 or year 4. I suppose we could call it over maybe. But if you look back over what you've accomplished in the last 3 or 4 years that you started working on as a result of things you were up against back then, what would you keep doing, or what would you do differently in hindsight? At TJ.
Well, I know so times have changed since then on at least in HCA, we've also had a big movement into cloud and data science use cases with all of our patient data as well. So what was been interesting to carry over is the idea of having good priority focus, optimizing quality of life, being able to keep up with adversity and agility of risks has really carried into the team of where we can kind of go to new domains and sort of protect. The interesting thing I think we're still trying to balance out is just we went full remote, even where 30% of our defense center is remote workers too. How do you keep that sort of leadership growth, the interpersonal skills? I mean, even going back to the Health ISAC, I remember going back, I was like, man, I gotta get my social skills edges back. It was like shaking cobwebs off. So that's rippling through some of our lower level folks and other of just how to keep that momentum. So that's something we're watching over now and trying to be a little creative of how to get people together or interpersonal. And
cool. Lisa, Mike.
Okay. So for me, I think a lot of the stuff that we learned from the pandemic, we've been able to reuse on the Russia-Ukraine war effort, right? So when that kicked off, the actors forgot about COVID, I think, and they went to Russia-Ukraine headlines. So being able to use what we learned during COVID in another world event was really important. But this time I had a little bit different perspective, because you had a geopolitical event now that was causing this issue. And so, again, intelligence in the spotlight. Why are we briefing on geopolitical activities in the cyberspace? And everybody knows there's a cause and effect, right? And so if you look at where your organizations sit, for us, we had 6,000 people in Poland, which was very near it. And so that's why we cared about it. But there's other reasons. I mean, everybody has reasons why they cared about the Russia-Ukraine effort. At GSK, I have a whole ton of different reasons. And so it's taking those things that we learned during the pandemic and being able to apply it to the next situation. And then after Russia-Ukraine, there's going to be another one. We've got some stuff teeing up already, right? So always being able. So the key thing for me that I've figured out is being resilient. So not just your organization, but the vendors that you work with and the different partners that you have, making sure that there's resiliency across everything. I mean, even just in this last year, right, we had a certain vendor that went down that people used for timesheets. How many organizations were impacted and couldn't do their timesheets? How silly is that? But why would you think about that causing an impact? But it does, right? And so making sure that you have resilient operations and exercising that is probably the biggest thing for me that came out of everything that I've learned over the last few years.
For me, it was organizational structure and culture. There's two worlds. There's the world before COVID where people were in the office, and then there's the world after where everybody worked from home. The cyber defense program, when I left UHG, was like 20% in the Twin Cities. At that point, like it went from 50 to 20%, became a much more global organization. But it put a lot more burden on the folks that were there pre-remote work, distributed. They became nodes, which a lot more traffic went through, and basically the new people that came in later became basically like leaves. And you got the scaffolding of the organization that basically these long-term folks that were there, and as one or two of them basically left, even more work, like a network basically went through them. And that was probably one of the largest changes in basically working with that. Microsoft did some research and in-office workers are like 18% more productive, but not really. It's against people that came in during COVID because they just don't have those networks and they basically haven't built it out. That has been the hardest part, basically how to rebuild that, because we're never going back to the way it was before. People are never going back to the office, every single day. It's always going to be distributed from now on in some context. Maybe it'll be 3 days, maybe it'll be hybrid, whatever. But building those networks and communicating and getting that trust, that's, especially now that I'm over at like 3M, I'm seeing it's a much different game remote than it is on-prem.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, no, I think these are all good points. I think just to touch on something, Lisa, you reminded me of, some of the things that we were forced to do, updating threat models to incorporate interesting new threats that we hadn't seen before, disinformation, misinformation being one, kind of found its way through a variety of programs. Our tabletops changed to being a little more careful with the tech we selected, really looking for the things that could be wildly disruptive but super under the covers, hard to guess.
Yep.
Time clocks is a great one. We went after things like that, so that was something that we hadn't been super focused on, thinking about it in the context of a pandemic with nobody there, all sorts of information flying, potentially compromised communication networks in the process, ransomware on the fly. We also started doing quite a bit more, and I think this is due to just basically to the other point you made. I don't know about you, I was getting up at 6 a.m. and not putting my computer down until 8 p.m. We got a lot more work done, right? And so we were able to bring in really hard things to do at the time, which was like, manual purple teaming systems to just validate controls were effective and take that, automate it, and turn it into almost entirely closed loop purple teaming where we could spray in a bunch of threats, look at a few different TTPs, pick threat actors we wanted to simulate, and run purples against any infrastructure, including our internal production infrastructure, which had never been done. And then, zero trust actually became a thing for us, which I know that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And no, I'm not talking about ACLs on a switch, right? But that was that became a priority for us, and we actually at Athena we actually implemented a first end-to-end zero trust model for one production system back in 2019, so that was pretty cool.
It was an accelerant of investment. You
Totally.
All those projects that you had on the backlog, suddenly all the barriers were gone.
Yeah.
And you mentioned threat modeling. I call that adversarial modeling because it means something different in Intel. But knowing the actors that are the biggest threat to you provide a great value versus looking at every actor, right? Because you have those, you can look at the logs in your system, you can take intel that you share with organizations, and you can put that all together, and you can define those actors who really are the ones that you need to focus on, and then optimize that across your organization and create rules to catch it or put things in to block them and make sure you've got coverage for those TTPs. So that's another thing we really focused on during that time.
I think it was clear who they were now, right?
Yep.
I think they made themselves known. All right, so we have 2 minutes or so left. We can take a couple questions from folks in the audience. If you have any, please raise your hand, or I think there's a mic somewhere for any of the folks on stage.
I got it running here.
Sure. Hey, I can't speak loud enough, but a lot of you have mentioned focused, your efforts, how you shifted, reprioritizing. That's okay.
I can hear you. We'll
can hear
repeat
you.
the question.
Make sure the room can hear you.
I think everybody can hear Brent.
So you talked about focusing, having to reshift efforts, how you're prioritizing, generally having more work than you have the personnel and the time in order to deliver. So when you look and take in your threat modeling and your intel, do you focus on, what's your opinion if on one end of the spectrum you have a bunch of security tools in front of one of your critical business applications with lots of findings and lots of risk, and on the other end you have one of your critical business applications with no tools and no findings in front of it? Where does your effort go when you get that intel? Are you fixing the things you know about, or are you trying to spin up a visibility into the things that you don't know about?
Well, I'll put one plug in and then somebody else can answer, but you can't understand your risk without intelligence, right? You can have all the risk, but if you don't have the intel to back it up, you really can't understand the risk. So take a look at it from that perspective and look at it from not just a risk perspective, but what's the likelihood that something's going to happen to that, and then focus that. Tools optimization and rationalization is the kind of thing that might be good. Making sure you have the right tools to protect the right information. Establishing crown jewels so you know what to protect. Those are like little key things that I would focus on.
And talking to that purple team concept, we usually look at it in 3 different phases. It's one where you're trying to take the whole procedural TTP of a chaining that would occur to that critical asset, or a control itself, like take endpoint, the firewall, trying to purple that, or a specific detection for detection engineering. So when you describe where it might be missing on preventive versus detective, typically we'll take those through the TTP testing to walk the whole cycle, and a lot of times you need that telemetry up front and then the deeper prevention. So we kind of walk it that way depending on the criticality of the system as well, which takes a priority off strategic themes, the intelligence, and the risk of the system as well.
So visibility is always king. You have to focus on visibility. You can't respond to what you can't see. But if you do have limited resources, and specifically since you're talking about vulnerabilities or exposures, I'm a huge advocate for EPSS, the exploitation probability scoring system, because not all CVEs are the same. It also comes back to the exploitability. Generally, you should have some sort of attack surface management capability that can validate that a thing is there, because just because it won't exist doesn't mean it'll actually be exploited. There's also a whole bunch of other considerations, and then also the impact of the exploitation is not always the same either. RC is not the same as a, session hijacking.
Right. Yeah. My opinion is visibility.
Visibility,
before everything else.
That's a good highlight.
Decide later.
Visibility uber alles.
Yes. Any other questions, thoughts?
Well, we're at time. I think the expo hall is open in 15 minutes. So enjoy. Thank you guys.
Yeah,
Great.
thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you for coming.
panel session.